Hello everybody, I am Ben from Team Panic, and today we're going to be looking at how my saw bot Microblaze went at ARC's September meet. So this was put into the A League at ARC's September meet, and we're just going to jump right on in. So ARC always runs a round robin and then a semi-final type bracket setup. So we had a round robin with 3 other competitors, and our first fight up was against Sideswipe, which is a very, very nasty horizontal spinner, and it was just bad luck on our part really, because this was the worst type of matchup for this brand new robot, because it's not exactly the most armored robot I'd ever built, and I was kind of hoping that we would get some wedge fights or some control bot fights first, so I could test out the weapon system before I could, before I was testing out how well it survives a hit. But yeah, RNG did not like us today, so we're going straight up against a very, very powerful weapon. So we won, but at what cost? A very hefty cost, unfortunately. Basically, this fight was not good for us at all. They managed to take out a good chunk of one side of the front wall. Thankfully, where none of the electronics are, but it's still a very worrying thing. Also, the arm never sat straight from this point on. One of the hits twisted the mount inside the robot. So the gear connection between the arm and the actual servo gear was always a bit loose from this point on. So yeah, it was a bad fight up first. Now, the other thing too is that this was my very first attempt with a saw. I've run an overhead hammer saw before, but that quickly got turned into just a bad vert. So this is my first real attempt trying to do an actual overhead saw type robot in a fight, and yeah, it took me a little while to get used to how everything went. And I was thinking when I first went into the fight, I was like, oh, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to keep the weapon off to preserve battery, and I'm going to flick it on as the arm comes down. But that just proves to be difficult, basically. It turns out that, yeah, you're not thinking about flicking this other switch when you're in the middle of a fight. So it ends up being the best case, literally just to flick the switch, have the motor running the whole time, and saw people as you get a chance to. It seems to work somewhat well anyway. Yeah, so this was not a great fight to start with, like I said, and I did get a couple of little nicks on him, but didn't really do too much damage. He did a lot of damage to us in comparison, and then of course he ended up in the pit, which, yeah, was a little bit interesting, and not normally how I like to win fights. I would have much preferred to cut his horizontal spinner off, but that was not in the cards for us. Anyway, so that was that fight, and we're 1-0 right now, which is quite nice. So next up is Anty-Matter. Anty-Matter is a very tanky little wedge that we've seen on this channel a lot of times in the past. This guy is actually kind of designed to go against Anty-Matter, or at least be more of a challenge for Anty-Matter, because our last robot, This Is a Party, had a lot of trouble getting at Anty-Matter, so hopefully this time we can hit Anty-Matter with the weapon.
3, 2, 1, go!
And that was interesting. So yeah, I post these videos to the ARC Facebook page, and I posted one about having the saw robot a couple of weeks before this event, and yeah, he saw that and prepared. So they had some nice mesh top armor, which made it very hard for me to get into their wheels. I did manage to put a nice big cut through it, but unfortunately couldn't actually get enough depth of cut to actually hit any electronics inside, so he was able to keep moving. But I'm still quite happy with that, considering the saw was a little bit janked up and not cutting as powerfully as it could have been. The fact we got a nice cut through the mesh and everything was really, really cool. I quite liked that. This fight ended because he actually ended up under the wall. His wedge is quite low and quite sharp, and he managed to get in and get jammed underneath the wall. Now, I've been using acetate on my wedge, which is actually one of your guys' suggestion, and in this fight it was actually working. So like I said, his wedge is quite nice and sharp, but I was still managing to get under him from time to time, which did allow me to jam him to the wall and get some nice good cuts on him. So that was fun, that was interesting. Yeah, and like I said, it was a bit disappointing that he got stuck under the wall. It's a weird way to win a fight, that. But you know, it was good. I did also back off of him when he first got stuck. I was like, oh, I'm gonna use this opportunity to saw him, and then I sawed him a little bit and was like, wait, I think he's stuck. So I just like backed off and yeah, let him get counted out, which he did, and therefore I won that fight. So next up, we're going up against Smasher, which is an Antweight with a hammer driven by a servo. And the cool thing about this is it has a nice exposed servo on the top of the robot. So I want to take a big bite out of this servo.
2, 1, go!
So there you go, I won that fight as well. So we're doing pretty well at the moment at 3-0. So we've won our round robin pretty concisively. But I must say, I feel like I'm getting a little bit better with the weapon by this point of the tournament. I was getting it in positions I wanted it a little bit better. I was going for the servo and I was going for the wheels, and at various different points I managed to hit a wheel and take the tire off the wheel. I didn't manage to do damage to the plastic of the wheel, but I did actually get the tire off of it, which actually, yeah, hampered his mobility quite a lot. And I also did get the servo. However, I didn't cut all the way through the servo. I did just kind of slice into it. I think, like I said, this weapon just wasn't quite right ever since that first fight. So the arm being at an angle means I'm not getting the pressure in the gears because I've only got a small amount of gear teeth actually engaging on each other. So I'm not getting the pressure on that. And also, I think the blade might have started to get a little blunt by this point, but I didn't kind of twig to that on the day, so I just left the blade on going into the next fight. But yeah, so I did some damage to the servo. Even though I did that damage, the servo still worked. It was totally fine and kept smashing. I think they did replace it after this fight, but they didn't need to. It was still working. The other thing too was that when the pit went down, I heard the pit alarm. I backed way out because I was like, I don't want to be in around the side of the pit there as the pit drops, because yeah, the front of this thing means that the driving is just a little bit wonky. So I tried not to do that, and then when it was pretty clear that he was planning on staying near the pit, I went back in, and that's where I got the wheel, and I did a little bit more damage to the servo and things, and then yeah, of course he ended up in the pit, because yeah, that was what was happening. That was, you don't stay around an open pit. That's just a thing. So anyway, we're 3-0 and going on into the finals, where we face Brastoff, which is a nasty vertical spinner.
3, 2, 1, go!
Ooh, this was not a great fight on my end. So first of all, as the fight started, I forgot to flick my switch to turn the weapon on, which didn't help matters when I grabbed him and put the weapon down and nothing happened because the weapon wasn't turned on. I realized my mistake, pulled the weapon up, turned the weapon on, got tipped over, and then he nibbled at the electronics, which that was a very, very, very scary moment. Thankfully, my battery is packed all the way in the bottom, so it didn't actually get hit. And the only thing that got hit was the connector that runs between the ESC and the weapon motor. So the only thing that stopped was that, because it got hit and cut, and therefore the weapon motor couldn't spin anymore, which was kind of annoying not having my weapon, but it could have been way worse. If he'd hit a receiver, if he'd hit a drive motor, if he'd hit the battery, any one of those things, it basically would have been game over. Not only for that fight, but for the rest of the tournament, because I didn't have spares of any of those, or if I did have spares, I didn't have enough time to get the spares into the robot. So it would have been a very, very bad day. Thankfully, as it happened, it was not a very, very bad day. And instead, all I did was take out the weapon motor, which, yeah, it was annoying, but the fact that I've got a dustpan on the front does help, because I can still get in underneath people and drive them into the pit and into the walls and stuff. I did get that one really long, good push towards the pit, but as I said, with the dustpan being a little bit skew-if, the drive is a little bit skew-if, so I didn't quite get him into the pit, so he could actually then come back at me again. His weapon breaking did help everything quite a lot, because obviously then he didn't have his weapon, and then once he got himself stuck upside down, that was basically the end of that fight, because yeah, driving upside down is a complicated, messy task. So yeah, it was you know, a bit of a foregone conclusion almost. I mean, you can drive upside down fairly well, but yeah, it's very easy to make that mistake and end up in the pit when you're upside down. I mean, he didn't quite end up fully in the pit, he was just on the edge, so I had to go over there and give him a little and nudge him in, but that is what I did, and we won that fight. So, as I said, the weapon wiring got cut, so I had to go ahead and fix that. Now, we're going on into the final, but there's a lot of things going on, right? So, the weapon has just been damaged fairly significantly. The acetate at the front here is fairly beat up, and we're going up against Anty-Matter again. So Anty-Matter and I have made it into the semi-finals, both beaten our semi-final opponents, and are now fighting again as the final of the tournament. So yeah, there was a lot going on, and if I'd had more time, I would have replaced the acetate, but because I had to repair the sawblade, I repaired the sawblade, and that was about all I had time to do. Repaired the ESC wiring to the sawblade motor. The sawblade itself also, I think, got a little bit blunted, but all I could do was get those wires soldered back together and ready to go again, and then we had this.
3, 2, 1, go!
So yeah, the fights and the strain of the fights kind of showed here. We really didn't do any additional damage to Anty-Matter. We did very little. I mean, part of that is because it was a lot of banged up, or a lot more banged up at this fight than it was in the previous fight. But also I didn't drive very well. I didn't get very many good grabs, and I think that's partly to do with the acetate also being beaten up. It didn't help matters any. So yeah, there was a lot of things that I could have and should have done a bit better going into this fight. But yeah, sometimes when you're at an event like this, time is a very critical thing, and you can only use it on some things and not others. And in this case, I had to do the repairs that I need to do, but I was also fighting Annie, and I was also fighting Flaming Dragon, and other things were going on, so it just, none of that happened. And also, Anty-Matter drove better in this fight, I believe. If you look at the two fights, our first fight with Anty-Matter, I think I was driving better than he was, and then I think in this fight, he was driving better than me. He was getting more pins and more pushes, and getting under me more and getting into kind of beneficial positions more than I was. And more power to him. Like, he drove really, really well, and it was a really nice push from like a back corner all the way into the pit that got us out of this tournament. So that does also mean that we got a second place. And actually, out of the Beetle weights and the Antweight A's, we did exactly the same thing with both robots. Rolled through the round robin event, won our semi-final fairly convincingly, and then ended up in the pit in the finals. So that's an interesting little parallel. I was very consistent at ARC's September meet, as it turns out. This thing, for a first event, I am really, really quite happy with it. I mean, there's a lot of things there that it did really well, and there's some things there that it did okay, but we can seriously improve on in a second version. So that's what we're going to do with this in the next month or so. We're going to sit down and we're going to do a full redesign and make this a lot better. There's some things in here, like I said, that aren't necessary or just too much weight or whatever, and messing things up. So like the HDPE scoop, that is going to go because that messed more things up than it helped. And I've got a few other ideas as well. So hopefully we can get this thing back up and running and actually put even more damage into people, because that would be really cool. This thing is showing some promise right now, and I want to keep going with that because I think we can saw a robot in half. Well, okay. We're not going to be able to saw a robot in half. I wish we could saw a robot in half. That would be awesome. But yeah, I'll settle with stopping someone, like soaring into some electronics and stopping a robot like that. I think that would be amazing, and I want to keep working on this until we get somewhere close to that. Anyway, that is going to be it for this video. There is one more video coming from ARC's September meet, and that will be Flaming Dragon's set of fights. Now that was in the Antweight B League, so I'm probably going to do a really quick video on that. I'm not going to do a lot of talking in between each fight because, yeah, there's not a lot to say. Flaming Dragon had a lot of issues with it, which are mostly conceptual design issues. So yeah, there'll be a video out on that probably on Tuesday. Like I said, probably not a lot of talking from me and going through those fights. Once I've kind of told you the conceptual issues, yeah, the rest of all of the fight recaps kind of go the same way and hit the same notes. So yeah, that video will be out soon, but like I said, don't expect big things from Flaming Dragon. That might also have to be one that we go ahead and do a second version of, because I think with just some little tweaks, it could be a lot better than it is. But anyway, that's all for this video. I hope you guys have enjoyed that one, and I will see you in the next video.